Well, welcome to the 2018 Gallup Learning Series. I guess this is episode 2, if you will. My name is Paul Walters. I am a workplace consultant with Gallup. And on behalf of the whole Gallup team, we're excited to have you join us for a week of learning offered exclusively for Gallup certified strengths coaches. That's right, for certified strengths coaches only. So if you are not certified and you made it on this call, kudos for you for working the system. We've got a great week of coaching topics to design to enhance your Clifton Strengths coaching expertise, to not only make you a better coach, but increase the impact you have with your clients and organizations that you partner with. So each session will be recorded so you have a chance to catch up on something that you miss, or if you miss something during the session, you can watch it again. And who wouldn't want to watch these a second time, because there's a lot of good stuff here. Our presenters this week include Gallup experts and experienced Gallup coaches. And don't forget to access the participant guide. So you would have received a link to download this participant guide. It would have been emailed to you on Friday, January 19th. So I would encourage you to check your spam folders, because it's possible that it filtered its way there. But again, you should have received the email around Friday, January 19th. And the email was sent to the address you use when registering for the learning series. A quick note on professional credit. So the learning series has been approved by ICF for continuing coach education credits as well. I will provide a bit more information on that at the end of today's session. So we're excited about the series ahead and look forward to hearing your questions and comments through the chat feature that was highlighted earlier. So again, if you look on your screen, there is a chat feature. Send those questions to us and we will try to get them to the presenters for today's session. So with that said, let me do an introduction to today's presenters. I'm really excited for the crew that you have with you this evening. Well, evening time for those of us in the US and those of you outside of the US. In India or Australia, it is obviously not evening for you. But so today's session is increase your manager coaching effectiveness by tying engagement and performance into your sessions. So our discussion will focus on coaching managers and gaining insights into what the best managers do to engage their people and guide their performance outcomes. So, and back to that participation guide that we talked about, we're going to refer to pages 4 and 5 in that participation guide. So go to that part of your participation guide, take notes, and follow along there. I'd like to start out by introducing two of my favorite colleagues at Gallup, for the most part. Drive me a little bit batty sometimes too, but Mike McDonald and Austin Solentrap, they told me that what we can expect from this session will be a combination of Game of Thrones, Walking Dead, and Seinfeld. I don't know what that means, and I'm really looking forward to it. So I want to start out with Mike McDonald. Mike McDonald's a Gallup workplace consultant who works with Gallup clients and managers really to align strategies and initiatives to produce high levels of employee engagement and well-being. Mike has helped a number of Gallup clients from small to large companies in really a plethora of sectors to improve engagement and well-being. So Mike's top 5, and for those of you who know Mike well, these are certainly his top 5: ideation, input, learner, achiever, and focus. And then let's turn to Austin. Austin is a Gallup learning and development consultant and holds an ICF coaching credentials. Apparently, they're just giving those out to anybody these days. But Austin coaches and consults with managers and teams on the influence of a strengths-based approach on human development. He really specializes in helping Gallup clients to bridge the gap between Gallup research and its practical application in the workplace. Allison's top 5 are communication, activator, futuristic, belief, and positivity. And again, cannot say enough good things about these two gentlemen. Mike and Austin, thank you for joining us today, and we're excited for you to take us off into the session.
Wonderful. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Paul, I'm not sure that leaves us much of a segue. So maybe Austin, we just jump right in. Is that I don't think there's any clean or easy way to transition. So let's just get started.
Deal.
Awesome. Well, friends, we thought maybe as we get into coaching managers, it might help to get into the head of a manager. And you all are familiar enough with Gallup to know that we've done a lot of research, that we firmly understand the presence and the significance and the importance of what a manager means to the workplace. And so we thought first and foremost, we just kind of pull back the lens and just look at the landscape of what does it mean to be a manager? And what are the circumstances that they're expected not just to operate in, but to actually succeed in? And how does that shape and adjust and affect how we coach and how we set managers up for success through our coaching, knowing the environment that they're expected to operate and succeed in. So I'm going to pull back a little bit of that lens and just kind of speak to a couple reference points that Gallup research has revealed, just so that we understand as coaches, how are we leading that manager onto the success that's really at stake if they don't do their job well. So the convergence of a lot of these reference points really comes from our millennial report, if some of you have checked into that, our Women in the Workplace report, our Gallup World Poll, and then even our recent State of the American Workplace report. These themes and narratives just keep showing up over and over and again from all these vantage points. So they really confirm, again, the presence and the value and the importance of the manager. So I'm going to walk us through a couple of those that kind of give us a little bit of a definition about just what this world looks like and feels like. The first thing that we see from our research is again, and this is a shift from old mindset to a new mindset that'll help you understand the evolution of the manager. But it used to be that a paycheck was really a defining and almost singular motivator for whether somebody said yes to a job or no to a job. It could be a fairly transactional decision point. And the evolution towards human development from all of us to need to feel like we're growing and developing has superseded that. And so that changes the nature. It changes the level of involvement for the manager, not just to offer $5 more for somebody to do something, and rather intrinsically connect with them in a way where there's something emotional. There's a growth and a perspective about that individual that far and away exceeds whatever dollar value they might be making with a different offer and a different opportunity. So that shifts the perspective of the manager. We see another shift in terms of purpose, right? That we're moving from what I get as an employee. We're seeing a shift now in terms of, how does my job actually align with my purpose that I've identified in my life? And do they integrate? Do they actually make sense out of and support each other? And so the singular perspective of just who a person is at their place of work, it was never compartmentalized, but now there's more transparency and understanding about the fact that that's got to be acknowledged, and we're asking for that as part of our workplace. Another aspect of it is just the notion of just employment, having a job, being a box that was checked off that was vitally important for us and our perspective of who we are as a human being, that's gone far beyond just the possession of a job, to where now it's this broad statement about my entire life. And so there's no separation, and that integration really does really hit the windshield of a manager. How do they actually lead a team or work with an individual on their team, acknowledging their entire life and not just who they are, their performance at work? And then the one that I think we'll all appreciate and connect to is a movement from weakness to strength. And now it's no longer effective, nor was it ever effective, for a manager or leader just to simply say, have a coaching exchange or a conversation where, hey, Austin, let me give you some feedback. Here's what you're doing wrong. Don't do that anymore. Okay, you feel good about that? I think that's a job well done, and I'm going to move on to somebody else now. Okay, moving away from that, it's fine to have those guardrails around what we don't do well and to have that corrective course of action. But as you can see with the narrative around development and purpose and life, it's so much more strengths based, and there's no way for a manager to ignore that, not to acknowledge that when we look at particularly engagement. And when we look at what performance is on the other side of engagement, that strengths-based approach, and you all know it better than anybody, is paramount in the mind and the management of that particular leader. And here's the hinge. Here's where the sweet spot for our coaching, if we hit this right, if a manager places themselves right, can unlock and release all of this new evolution, this new appetite and demand, if we would say, for the workplace, is really this notion in this conversion of moving away from being a boss to a coach, right? And there's some differences, right, between ourselves as strengths coaches and who that manager is as a coach, but the similarities still remain the same. That coach manager who's literally metaphorically at practice, metaphorically helping train that individual on their team, seeing them when they struggle, seeing them when they succeed, and providing fantastic performance strengths-based feedback to them in the moment. the other part that's really been a significant finding for us is the quote unquote annual review, right? That somehow in one conversation per year that lasts an hour, we could talk through, unpack, and develop a person for all that they needed or required in a way that would last them for another 365 days. The annual review and our performance management research has really taken a lot of hits. And the annual review isn't a bad thing. The problem is it's been positioned to be the only thing. And so when we look at the frequency of conversations, the content of conversations, it places a different shift in expectation on managers now as a coach to be involved in conversations that are much more meaningful, much more performance provoking, and integrating all of those factors and features that I referenced earlier. So I just want to give a broad landscape of the world that the manager is living in and trying to live with and succeed with. But I just want to leave you this one last, we wouldn't be Gallup, right, if we didn't reference at least one particular data nugget in transition. But our research would tell us that the manager explains 70% of the variance of the engagement level of their team. So the manager isn't the end all be all, but they're a really big portion of what engagement looks like, feels like, and what it means as a leading indicator of performance. So it just gives us a different frame of reference, hopefully a more accurate frame of reference for our own coaching of managers. So Austin, I'm going to segue and transition on into you. When you've integrated all of these features into your own coaching, but as we leave the can't miss on the manager world, take us on into coaching conversations and how do you provoke awareness around that manager that touches on these points and helps them succeed?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mike. Thanks. When I think about coaching managers, everything you said is a great context for where they're coming from, what their world looks like, and how for many of them it's changed a lot in the last 5, 10, 15 years for many of these managers. And oftentimes, I heard this phrase growing up. I had no appreciation for it whatsoever. But the phrase was, "It's lonely at the top," right? And I always said, "Yeah, but at least they're at the top, right?" I'd rather be lonely at the top than lonely at the bottom, right?
Yeah, right on.
And it wasn't until I really got into coaching managers a lot, and probably 95% of the coaching I do now is people leaders of some sort, so executives, department heads, you name it. And when I think about this phrase, "it's lonely at the top," what does it really mean? What it really means is that oftentimes when we go in to coach a manager, they're looking around their room and they're seeing a bunch of people who are looking to them to fill a lot of roles, to be the one with the answers, to be the one with the plan, the one who can bail them out in a time of need, the one who can, give the signature to get something through they've been working on for a long time. Right. And that as a result, this pressure can mount. And so I think one of the first things I always like to do when I'm coaching a manager, and it's not always easy, but it's something I really strive for, is I try to give them permission to be human again. Mm. And when I say that, we talk so much about engagement and the emotional context of engagement, and that these needs we have and that sometimes they aren't met. And when they aren't met, it has an impact on our behavior and on our effectiveness. Well, my goodness, if I'm a manager and I feel the pressure to be all things to all people, sometimes I don't have the emotional vent to talk about my own disengagement or to talk about my own needs in the workplace. And that as a coach, we can oftentimes provide managers with a safe place to have a discussion they don't have anywhere else to go with. And so before I can ever help a manager understand how they can improve the engagement of their team, or they can, tactically do things differently with their group, I've got to help them first sort of let down their guard. And I think of that as permission to be human again. And that sort of, to me, has been a really powerful wall I can break down with people when I'm coaching them from a manager perspective. And one of the questions I often ask them around that is, I ask them, who do they have in their corner? In the work they're trying to do with their team, who do they have in their corner? And I'm trying to get an idea with them of, have they gone to other people with this kind of conversation? Do they have the kind of relationship with their manager that you described earlier, right? The true coaching relationship versus a boss. And I'm trying to pick up what their experience in the workplace is like before I get into any more of the depth with them and their teams.
Also, let me hop in with a question,
Yeah.
just because really great point there about making them feel human, and you are a safe space for them to connect. Because I get this question in a lot of our courses: what happens, and what strategies can you give some of the audience here of when you have a manager that just is so locked up, so tight that it's hard to really break through to them to make any movement with them and try to get them to talk about their strengths or their own awareness of who they are? What are some strategies that you employ or Mike employs to do this type of thing and break that wall down?
Yeah. So first of all, I think it comes from the first thing I try to do is I actually will walk oftentimes managers through the trust equation, which we talk about in our class. Meister's trusted advisor outlines a formulaic way to think about trust. And I will talk about the ideas of credibility, reliability, and intimacy in relation to self-orientation. And I talk through that sometimes very sort of metered like I just did there, but sometimes as just different topics in the questions I'm asking. And I will ask them, if I were a member of your team, how would I describe sort of the strength of the trust we have? And I get them to try to think about it, not in terms of something they're good at or bad at, but what are the things they naturally do well to build that with their team, and what do they maybe struggle with their team? So I try to ease my way in to breaking the ice rather than taking a wrecking ball to that wall and try and knock it all down at once. I try to find a crack in the wall that I can get in and have a conversation with. Because if somebody's putting up that kind of resistance, I got to reset a realistic goal and say, okay, I'm not going to get them to hug me today, but maybe I can get them to open up about something.
Love that.
So that to me, it's taking sort of what opening they give you in that sense, and all sort of in relation to what a realistic goal for that conversation is. Mike, anything you'd add there?
I think what you touched on is giving them permission to be human. I'm nodding my head because I think when we look back, just years of experience and just stereotypes and traditions that have kind of trapped well-intended managers. It used to be that there was a perspective that if you were a manager, you had to be almost a robot.
Yeah.
Right. That it was a sign of weakness if you actually did show that you could get emotional about something in either direction, positively or negatively, or that somehow that was seen as, a flaw in strength and leadership style. And I think that's probably one of the biggest discoveries and maybe more redeeming perspectives around behavioral economics and the way it ties into strengths and leadership is the fact that we don't want to get rid of emotion at all. We want to actually acknowledge the power of emotion to generate its most positive effect and see all of the great things that happen on either side from an engagement and performance standpoint. And one of the things I was laughing about, I know when I was just telling this story to an audience earlier today, but when I first got hired at Gallup, we go through all these psychometric tests to see if we fit a certain role or what have you. And there's a question, probably still exists, but the question was, when you are faced with a difficult or challenging experience, how do you handle that? How do you approach that? And so I gave what I thought was for sure the best response ever. Now, full disclosure, empathy is my number 34 strength. Okay. And so in my response to how I make a tough decision, I said, well, the first thing you do is you take all the emotion out of that decision, compartmentalize it, break it down, and then just piece it together logically in a way that arrives at a really great conclusion. Which everybody in the audience should be laughing at me right now, because that was for sure the worst answer ever given in the history of mankind. So I've always appreciated that and I loved what you just said, Austin, about the fact that it's acknowledging emotion and it's okay. And quite frankly, it's really effective in the right way for your team to know that you do care about something, that emotion is a great thing. And it's all right to be passionate, purposeful in how we exhibit it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And when you can get that to happen, when you can get a manager, when you're coaching them to acknowledge some element of emotion in your conversation, you're off to a great start. It's a great starting point, but just like with any coaching conversation, whether you're coaching a high school kid, you're coaching your best friend, or you're coaching the CEO of a major corporation, stirring up emotion is a really dangerous thing to do. But if you're going to do that, you've got to be prepared to help them guide that emotion to some sort of productive outcome, right? So I like with my themes and my talent profile, right? Thinking about I'm high harmony, I'm high empathy, high positivity. I enjoy living in the emotional space. I'm very comfortable with it, so it works well for me. If that's not a space you're comfortable playing in, it may not be the place you want to start, right? But because to me, when you really get down to it, what's inherently unique and different about coaching managers, and has been a real learning point for me in my career, has been the fact that really there's a little less tolerance for the exploration in general, a little less tolerance for that, allowing a coach in to just sort of help them talk through something. There's generally a little bit more of an urgency with their time because they've got all these different responsibilities and all these different stakeholders. If they're going to block an hour for a conversation, they're going to want to make sure they can tangibly show what came out of that hour. What am I going to do differently? So if you think about our name it, claim it, aim it process, sort of our high level approach, they're going to want to get to aim it pretty darn quickly. And it's not that you jump straight to it, because the way I think a trap I see managers try to get themselves into is name it, claim it, aim it becomes aim it, aim it, aim it, right? And they just jump straight into, what am I going to do? Tell me what to do. Give me advice. What should I do here? Here's my problem. Solve it for me. And although it's well intended, and I can certainly understand the motivation behind it, when we live in that aim it, aim it, aim it cycle, we're losing the opportunity for a lot of that self-discovery, and we're losing the opportunity for some of the client-driven ideas here. So thinking about how you can help them brainstorm solutions and brainstorm activities without prescribing activities and prescribing ideas is something to consider with managers in particular. So I oftentimes will certainly steal shamelessly from successes in the past and help clients think about when facing a similar situation. I've had clients who have tried X, Y, and Z. Any of those spark a thought in you, or getting them to think through different ideas, but that they still choose. When they're going to come at you asking for advice, more than likely, and saying, what should I do here? It's fighting the temptation as a coach to help them fix it, because that's not always our role to play. So the urgency of the present, right, that is sort of present for so many of us in this fast-paced world, I think is heightened with managers. And they're oftentimes, if they're thinking about an hour of their time, they're thinking about, how can you help me solve these 3 fires I have right now, rather than thinking about the long-term development of their skill set or their talent down the road. That's less of a priority to them right now. They get 120 emails in the inbox with 6 people's vacation they got to process, and 42 expense reports on the docket that they're trying to worry about. How can you help them take a load off their plate today? So I think we've got to balance as coaches our desire to play the long-term development game with their desire to help them in the urgency of the present, right? And Mike, I know you've managed teams for a long time and for many years at your career at Gallup. How have you seen maybe some of that dynamic at play?
Yeah, I loved your outline of aim, and aim. I think it's very accurate and very, I think it's such a great description. I typically don't find managers who are withholding effort or don't want to try hard. It's simply it's just the overcorrected posture around aim, and aim. And I think what you touched on earlier, you kind of brought me I guess to a different point of awareness, or even just some reflection around how do we help them, right, pump the brakes. I love the questions you asked, the framework you were asking it through, where it causes that person to know their team can only benefit from their leadership if they're actually investing in and developing their leadership. I love data if possessioned correctly, just because there's accountability to it. And I think if we put some of this information out in front of managers along with our coaching, it can help kind of keep their eye on a level of accountability they wouldn't have otherwise. But one of the things I love about our engagement research is it talks about, if leaders are categorically engaged, then their managers are 39% more likely to be engaged. So you've got a cascade kind of kick right there, just in terms of modeling and relationship and osmosis. But what really, I think for every manager that should get their attention is that on the other side of that, if managers are engaged, their teams are 59% more likely to be engaged.
Mm-hmm.
So just think about that. Leaders engaged causes managers to be 39% more likely to be engaged. And managers engaged causes their teams to be 59% more likely to be engaged. So I think sometimes math, metrics, stats is not a bad way just to at least get the attention and to reinforce the priority, almost counterintuitively, of the manager actually developing themselves, making sure that they're creating margin for themselves, knowing that that's a great strategy towards performance and engagement, if nothing else. So, again, it takes varieties of different facets and different entry points to create those types of awarenesses. That works for me. But I think that there's almost, I always tease, there's kind of a gravitational pull for a lot of managers towards metrics, and it's a good way to get some attention and reinforcement.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me ask a quick, either Austin or Mike. We keep talking about engagement here. Help me understand how you make the link for managers between that strengths piece and the engagement piece. So help make that connection for us.
Yeah, so I think that's what's really fun about that is I think a lot of that depends on the strengths we're talking about, right? I think how I do that really does depend upon what that manager's strengths really are. So there's a natural connection point at Q3 when we're talking with engagement. So level set, a lot of the people I coach are familiar with the Q12, right? So if you think about the managers that I'm coaching, or my background prior to joining Gallup, having been a client for a long time, when I think engagement, I think Q12. So to me, there's a real comfort in understanding the different elements of engagement, the 12 elements, the needs that are associated with those elements of engagement. So when I'm working with managers, the first thing I'm trying to do is I'm trying to assess their understanding of engagement. When I say that word, what do they think about? Because the reality is a lot of managers, when they think about engagement, they're thinking about executing a survey and getting results and action planning and moving on with their life, because it's another one of those things on their to-do list that is 1.5 miles long, right? So if that's where I am with a manager, then I'm going to try to help them see how can they best approach this process. What are their talents, their strengths that can help them approach this process to be the most rewarding experience for them? That's one way to think about it. One of the ways I guess will go in a different approach with managers on this is I'll just come out and ask them what the favorite part of their job is. What's their favorite aspect of their role? That if they could just do one thing that they're responsible for all day, every day, what would that be? And that helps me get an insight into what their role as a manager in their organization really is. Are they a coach? Are they really a super doer who's just a really high-ranking individual contributor who has to push buttons in the performance process? Or are they a real hands-on manager who's out there developing, coaching people, right? So understanding what they love about their role. And then after a little dialogue there, a simple question of, how would it feel to have that exact conversation with each of your people? The same conversation we just had, how would it feel for you to have that conversation with each of your people? Because that's really what engagement is as the leader, is understanding what their people look for and love out of their role and how they can do more of it. And playing to people's strengths helps set them up to do more of that. And so it sometimes is breaking down the stigma of these big words like engagement and these big processes like the Q12. And you get into some of these large organizations and the Q12 process can be daunting, because you're talking about a couple weeks of communication, then the actual survey, then a couple weeks of compiling results, and then you have an organizational effort to roll out results. And so managers associate engagement now with this big initiative, rather than associating engagement with a conversation with their people. So I think breaking down for managers and making sure whoever I'm coaching, that they understand when I say engagement, when we say engagement, when you say it, are we saying the same thing? Or are we associating it with something that's auxiliary to the real point? there.
Excellent. Yeah, and I think, and just for those point of reference, Austin was talking about the Q12. That is Gallup's engagement measurement tool that we use to measure engagement at organization. Mike, Austin gave us some great insight there on the conversations with a manager around engagement. What does engagement mean? What does it look like? But how do you coach a manager around engaging their people? Because we're talking here about, hey, coaching coaching managers around engagement and well-being and performance, right? So talk to me about, how do you coach managers about their driving engagement with their employees?
Yeah, that's a really fun perspective, I think, for a lot of managers. It's interesting. The worst sales pitch that you could ever make, if you were to frame up coaching with a manager, is to tell them that you're going to come in with a lot of great coaching techniques and conversations, et cetera, that they really ought to consider adding to their plate to drive engagement and performance with their team. And they'll look at you as if you've lost your mind, because they're rightfully saying, look, I already work 50 to 60 hours a week, and you're going to come in and give me great options that I can add to my plate, right? And I really love this audit mentality, because what I've done, and I think in holding myself accountable, and I've seen a lot of growth and development come around this mindset, is really coaching them to go back through and audit what are the touch points you have with your team throughout a day, a week, a month, a year, and just to name them. So it's individual development plans, goal setting for a new year, team meetings, pay, whatever those things might be, where you're actually having an exchange with somebody on your team. And I'd love to have them come back in and say, okay, so for that space and time that you've already reserved for that discussion, how do we convert that to where it's aligned around me understanding more about what you do best, or more about what motivates you? And it's not at the expense of what we were originally going to discuss, but it reorients that discussion to where it's actually got elements and a centerpiece of engagement to it. And it's an amazing coaching piece for, I think, everybody in this audience to think about as an outcome. If we can get that manager to convert their human touch points with their team into those types of exchanges where engagement is part and parcel, that discussion, that it produces engagement. It feels very different to the person on their team on the receiving end. And I promise you, the manager is going to be much more enthusiastic about it as well, because it's going to feel different than other conversations they've had in the past, which were delivered in a more transactional way. But one of the things that I've been most excited about is we look at performance development, and we think about some of that backdrop to managers and leaders and the role that they occupy in driving engagement performance is what should conversations look like? So we talked about the displacement or the repositioning of the annual review to where we now have more frequent conversations, right? Just things that are more real and natural, and how managers would more organically interrelate with the people on their team. And I think a really important takeaway for all of this is, as managers try to disqualify themselves from this additional effort to coach and be involved, is as they speak to time, one of the most powerful conversations, actually the most powerful conversation for driving engagement, is what we've identified as the quick connect. And the quick connect literally is the water cooler conversation. And when I heard that, I was like, yes, I can do the quick connect all day long. I'm a champ at quick connect. I can do quick connect up and down, left and right. That I can do. Now, the thing about the quick connect is it can't be me talking about the Vikings-Eagles game last night, right? It can't be me saying, boy, it sure is cold outside, and having the person on my team saying, yes, it really is cold outside, and then just stopping at that point, right? It's got so it's there's two pieces to that. There's that I need to be intentionally involving, which is accountability and availability. And if in that quick 5-minute exchange, if I can communicate to that team member on my team that I'm available if they need help, but that there's also expectations that we're moving something forward that day, that's actually invited, that's actually engaging. And so anyway, Paul, I guess back to your question, that's what kind of keeps me moving forward. And then how do I integrate my strengths? How do I actually use my strengths for accountability, follow through, and a really quality level of content in that exchange?
Mike,
Yeah.
let me jump in just for a quick second as we bring Paul back in. We're getting some questions about definition of engagement and some of the basics when we think about engagement. I do want to refer folks to our Q12. So we have q12.gallup.com, or if you go to news.gallup.com and search for employee engagement, we have literally written thousands of articles on engagement. I think the last time we checked, some 35,000 people have been through our employee engagement survey. Just in the last decade. And so there's a lot of work in that. I don't know how much time we want to take away from this to talk about the engagement tool itself, but there are ways to contact us. And we have done a bunch of called to coach programs around the idea of engagement. So I'm going to encourage people to come circle back around. Austin, I want to ask you a question, though. Sure. When we think about the criticality, I just made that word up, of this made me sound important, didn't it? Of managing managers.
Yeah.
This is, I think sometimes we think of that frontline manager as being, we reference that a lot, that they're engaged, that they're having the right conversations. Mike, you mentioned, more beyond the water cooler, having these regular times to connect with their employees. But I do think we're at a critical point where we've really got to start thinking about those managers who manage the managers. Yeah. And Austin, when you're coaching at that level, what kind of things are we talking about there?
Right. Absolutely. It's great. It's a great sort of distinguishing point there around not all managers have the same level of responsibility, right? Some managers, if you think about that frontline manager, they may have that 10 or 12 people that are out there executing the strategy of the organization. If you're managing managers, golly, that 10 to 12 becomes 100 pretty quick. Right. And oftentimes far larger than that. So the first thing, when I think back to that permission to be human element, a component of that is making sure that managers understand just how big of a deal they are to some people. Right. That if I think back to my time early in my career, I was in this, the service industry, retail, banking, the food service industry for many years. And I think back to my first couple of jobs, and when a district manager would show up at a store, if I'm 19 years old, 20 years old, I'm working my way through college, and the district manager shows up, that's my boss's boss's boss. That's a big deal. Like, I want to make sure I stand up a little bit straighter, right? I'm going to make sure I turn on the charm and I follow the rules to a T, and I really show what I made. Sometimes the managers of managers, part of what leads to their success is a humble nature about themselves. They're just doing their job. They may have worked their way up. They may not view themselves as influential as they really are. So when I'm working with managers of managers, I'm making sure they understand that everything they do doesn't just have an impact to their day or the people directly around them, but that ripple effect of their impact, that they have an ability to significantly improve sort of the work downstream, if you will. So it's part of that. I think of it as part of that permission to be human again, that, hey, it's okay to pat yourself on the back and realize you're kind of a big deal, right? And that people are looking to you for guidance. So how do we make sure that you are controlling the image you want to be portraying, that you're sending the messages you want to be sending through your organization by the model you're setting every day?
Yeah, I think it's a coach too. Austin, you alluded to this, that the message at the next levels gets amplified on the way down, and to help them see that what they say is really, really, really important to that frontline staff. Right, it has this exponential effect in communication, and so giving them the right words to say, the right ways to coach, the right ways to coach down, right? Yep. The right ways to manage down and be able to handle that's super important.
And to that point, right? One of the things we talk about at Gallup in a lot of our training classes and when we're certifying coaches, right, is this idea of glare factors, right? The idea that as a manager, sort of the balcony and basement of my theme, the how it can help, how it can hinder, it is amplified. So as I'm coaching managers, I really like to make sure I have that discussion when I'm talking to managers of managers over around their intention with what they're doing versus the perception of what they're doing, and breaking that down to help them explore is a success they're having the result of just fantastic work on their part and they're doing everything really well, Is the struggle coming from the fact that they're doing everything they want to be doing, and it's just the perception is a little bit off? So it can help to reassure that we're not talking about blowing up their approach to management. It's about, maybe it's a little bit about softening an edge here or there, and a tweak rather than a whole reinvent.
Mike, you had mentioned these quick connect conversations that you can have. Do we have any really good examples, or have you heard some good examples? This is how I came out of the chat room, of some of these quick connect questions that we can ask.
Yeah, it's honestly there, and this again is what I love about it. Like, it is as straightforward, and if such a term can be used, as common sense as you could possibly imagine. It really has as much to do with the frequency of the conversation as it does the actual content. So I just have to, in the quick connect, it's literally me saying, "Hey Jim, how's that project going?" You giving me an update, and me basically either directly or indirectly letting you know, "Hey, well, let me know if you run into any snags. I'm here to help and remove any barriers. And by the way, good job. That's another day that we're closer." But that's a different conversation, right, than last night's game or the weather. And quite frankly, one of the things I think that's important for managers is, when we talk about performance and engagement and strengths, frequency decreases fear. And so that was part of the flaw to the annual review, is one time a year. Gosh, that's a pretty scary, significant conversation that if it doesn't go well for me, I got 365 more days of this experience that I have to endure and tolerate. And then there's this buildup right to it a year from now, where it's just this mounting pressure that increases because you only got one shot.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, if you and I are going to touch base once or twice a week, those conversations, they could kind of be really, really good or kind of be really not so good. But either way, it levels off that experience in a way where now we're operating from strength and success and security, rather than a fear-based, anxiety-driven existence, wondering what is my go-to think.
Yeah.
And that's real coaching, right? When we're involved in the day-to-day.
One of the frameworks, Mike, I think we have, if we go back to our Q12, and we've got this incredible framework of 12 questions that we're going to ask them in a survey, and they can all be turned into conversations that allow. So if we're coaching these managers, we can begin to help them with that framework and that them opening up to, these are the questions that matter to their employees. And so whether it's knowing what's expected of them, whether it's recognition, right? Whether it's having meaningful relationships at work, it's having some of those kinds of things. Each one of those questions leads to an incredible conversation that can be done. And I always say, you got 12 of them, and there's 12 months in a year. Right. Wow. How convenient that you, as a manager, you could spend a month on each one of those, thinking about bringing that up. Paul, as we think about engagement from that perspective, what have you seen? What also have you seen when we think about those quick connects, or in that area of managers to managers, or when we think about managers to employees? Have you seen anything else in there, Paul?
Yeah. Well, and I want to apologize. I cut off there. I'm going to blame.
No, nobody knows. We covered you.
Okay, good. The snowstorm in Minneapolis. But hey, so I hope this hasn't been covered already. But one of the feedback I hear from managers a lot, and I'm guessing Mike and Austin, you probably hear a similar thing, is, "Hey, I don't have time to do all these things," right? All these different conversations, quick connect, all these different conversations I need to do, development conversations, the annual review. There's so much to do there, right?
Yeah.
But I still, I guess my response, I'd love to hear, Austin and Mike, your response to this as well, is one, if you don't take the time to engage with your employees, you're missing the mark there, right? And if you front load the experience with your employees through these conversations, you're really saving the performance on the back end of things. And we also talk about these conversations into existing structures. As Mike was saying, hey, if you're passing somebody in the hallway, Austin, tell me where you're at with this project. Is there anything I can do to support you here? Or maybe it's, if people are remote, developing a collective space for people to come together and have conversations with each other. So I see that I get that question a lot from managers and that pushback, and I'm curious how you all would handle that situation if not addressed already.
Yeah. So I think, this idea that there's just not enough time.
Yeah.
I think there's one, I think, real key point here. That's on their mind. That's oftentimes what managers are going to be saying. As a coach, we can either embrace that or we can try to change their mind, right? I choose to embrace it. Okay, you don't have a lot of time. You don't have enough time to do this. What would life be like for you 6 months from now if you don't change anything? Right? If you don't have the time, something's got to give. What's going to come off the plate, right? Because oftentimes by asking the question around what will life be like 6 months from now if you don't change anything, they don't like that answer. Right. Oftentimes that gets them to a place where they like to say, yeah, I don't like that future you're painting there. Okay. So the construct that managers build in their mind is that there's too many things going on. I can't do this. Woe is me. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that's where they are and that's where they're starting. But as a coach, I gotta help them see a future with two different options. We do something about it. We don't do something about it. Let them choose. Let them choose the path they want to take. And if they want to take the path where something's changed, we've got plenty of topics for discussion on what that looks like going forward. But to get to the engagement connection and a lot of the things we're talking about with the kinds of conversations we're having, one of the things that's really kind of blown me away is I hear a lot from managers this idea that I'd like to hold my people accountable. I'm just afraid that if I do, it'll kill morale. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. And I love the research we've done on this topic in particular because it's really exciting to be able to tell people, oh, you want to hold people accountable? Great. Let's talk about how you do that, because if you do it, you will improve engagement. That accountability undeniably drives engagement up. Right. And that the ability to demonstrate to your people that you're paying attention, one, that you actually know what's going on, how they're performing, that's step one. But step two, that you are going to hold them to the mutually agreed upon expectations of the role. That if they signed up, they come to work and they're working for you every day, that you're going to actually be there to help hold up the end of the bargain. Yeah. And that when people are pouring their heart and soul into a role and they're looking across the room and they're seeing somebody just skating by, and there's no accountability formally in there, it's real demotivator to me to keep putting in that effort and energy. So it's fun when managers give me that bait of saying, oh, I'd love to hold my people accountable. I just can't, because that sort of opens up the door for us to be able to talk again about what it really means to hold people accountable. And that it does, we know it drives engagement up. Yeah.
I want to jump in and ask some questions around well-being, because we're also talking that as a component of it. But I want to address, we got one question from the chat room from Ann Oliver saying, our managers use the 4 keys to coaching guide as a starting framework. Is it still used? So Mike or Austin, comments or thoughts around that?
You bet. 4 keys coaching guide. It's awesome. We talk about our performance development conversations. The quick connect is one of them. The first one actually is role and relationship orientation. That is the 4 keys coaching guide. And it's a spectacular way, right? How do we level set with each other? What do you expect of me? What do I expect of you? And let's anchor ourselves in that understanding and set a foundation that we can really establish expectations and move forward from. So,
yeah.
Austin, what do you think about with that?
I think there are some tools that over the time they get enhanced and revamped and polished, and they get a new face on it. I think the 4 keys coaching guide, in my experience, has stood the test of time. Mm-hmm. So you don't need to fix something that isn't broken sometimes. If it's working for you, great. It's a great bank of questions and a great structure. I've used it. I can think of 3 different places I've used that kind of a tool.
Yeah. Great. So I think we've come a long ways here in talking about starting with the manager, coaching the manager, then coaching the manager around the team and those individuals on the teams, and driving really engagement through those conversations, driving engagement with the manager, helping the manager drive engagement with his or her team. But I want to pivot a little bit and see what you two have to say about both the performance piece, because this conversation is not just about engagement, right? It's about performance. So talk to me about driving performance and well-being through the manager with his or her team. if you can follow that long string there that I just crafted for the two of you.
Yeah.
Any thoughts, Mike? What do you want to start with you?
Yeah, performance and well-being in combination with each other. Well, the interesting thing about well-being, and this is where this will challenge managers. Well-being is even more peer influenced than engagement, and so it's one of the biggest findings we found when we think about engagement as part of the explanation of well-being, is that about 40% of a work group that's categorically engaged is still either struggling or suffering in their own well-being. And so there's another layer, there's an additive effect out there. And so I kind of want to bring this back actually to an answer Austin gave earlier. Well-being is going to challenge a leader or a manager, because they literally will have to work through people and not directly to people in a way that they can't just directly influence and override as they might be able to transactionally and in the short term with performance.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we think about some of those factors I mentioned earlier, like the transition of my paycheck to my purpose, right, or my job to my life, and some of the I guess the language around that would be reflective of well-being. That as a manager, you really are going to have to be, if you're directly influencing anything, it's going to be the culture that your team operates around and influences each other with and through, as a guide, as a catalyst, as the ignition. But you can't as directly influence well-being as you can performance. And so it's a strong level of leadership in that perspective. Austin, I'm gonna invite you into this discussion.
Yeah. So this is, to me, when I can get to this kind of a conversation with a manager, I'm in heaven. Let's be real. When you get a manager talking about their people's well-being, that to me is the one of the biggest signs that this manager gets it. First of all, right? Because managers who are thinking about well-being, to actually embrace that is embracing the fact that you're leading a group of human beings that have a million different factors in their lives that can contribute to their overall happiness and joy, right? So if you think about just focusing on engagement, well, just focusing on engagement is a huge thing. That's a big thing to deal with. And that if I'm gonna sort of enhance it and take the next level of overall well-being of my people, now I'm pulling in that 30% of things that impact engagement that aren't local. We talk about the 70% being the manager. These 30%, what I've just now done is I've taken that 30% and I've given it its own platform. And I've said, okay, if I'm going to care about your well-being, I'm now here to talk about these other 30% of things in life. Your family dynamics, your financial state, your physical health, all these things that previously I may have been able to hide behind and say, well, that's the external factors to engagement. I can't control those. I can't worry about those. I'm going to focus on these local things. So it's a much bigger conversation with people. So I don't take it lightly when managers or organizations want to venture into the well-being conversation, because to me, I think, and in my experience, you all tell me if you've had a different one, I oftentimes see organizations want to start talking well-being when in reality they want to start talking wellness.
Sure.
Right? Like that in reality they want to start talking about, healthier eating, exercise, and it's really done in an attempt to try to drive down healthcare costs, which is a valid thing and worthwhile effort without a doubt. Well-being, that's a component, right? It's a component of it, and so I think it's a much bigger conversation that it's really difficult. This is going to be, I think, where I bring it full circle. It's going to be really difficult for a boss to have a well-being conversation with an employee.
Yeah.
I don't want to say it's impossible, but it's pretty darn tough.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult to talk well-being with people without human nature and human element and emotion involved. So I think, to me, that's a long-term play with a manager. That's a multiple step coaching conversation to help them through that, because you're bringing a lot of variables into play.
Yeah.
But it can be some of the most rewarding stuff you do as well.
Absolutely. And even just today, I was leading an engagement session with a client. And one of the questions we ask them, right, is think about your best day at work. What words would you use to describe that? And then how did you feel?
Yeah.
Right. And so as managers, you're trying to create this feeling for your employees that every day is their best day at work. Right. And that feeling is well-being. That's a component of well-being. So I love what you all are saying. We've got a question from Jack here that says, what questions or tools do you use for the transition of a new manager who was promoted due to being a high-level individual performer? Though not a good reason for becoming a manager, it happens. So we see this a lot, right? Great individual contributor, thrown into a manager role, ready or not. Here they are. What tools, resources, strategies do you recommend for that new person joining the team or for the organization of how to coach that individual or improve them and get them ready?
Yeah, I've got two questions that come to mind that I would ask. First one would be what gets them excited about their new role? Like what gets them excited about managing a team of people? And the other one would be what's the biggest support their best manager ever gave them? Right. So getting them to shift out of that individual contributor mindset. So hearing what got them excited about their new role in the first place, and what support did their best manager ever give them? Those are the first two that jump in my mind. Mike,
love that.
Anything you'd ask?
Yeah, so I think you want to keep them obviously really intact and within their own boundary of where they're excellent. Yep. So if they are a really high performing individual contributor, that's not without influence. Mm-hmm. So if they know something, if they have an expertise, a skill or an ability, own that, be transparent about that, but then equally invite that kind of mindset in from the team that they're expected to influence or lead. And I think, quite frankly, that's as engaging a process or experience as there can be if we are led by somebody who's got a real clarity about their own boundaries of where they're at their best, but maybe where they really should draw on somebody or rely on somebody else on the team. Gosh, that's wildly engaging and developmental in an experience. So I think it's really, to your point, Austin, where do you find your sweet spot? Let's keep you there, but let's help you identify where others' sweet spot is and how do you call on them and position them at the right time. Just taking advantage of the influence and the skills and the subject matter expertise that person does.
And along those lines, Mike, I think implicit in this sort of situation is oftentimes that they were the peer of the people they're now managing, right? And so thinking about who on the team can be their cheerleader. Right. Who on the team is going to be somebody they can lean on to help support them, that they can, if hopefully they had a best friend at work prior to the promotion and they've got somebody they can really go to that can help win over the members of the team that may be a little hesitant at this point.
Yeah, great feedback there, gentlemen. And of course, we always have Gallup studies the best managers in the world, and we have lots of strategies around helping to develop managers through some of these, what we know the best do. So one great report I want to turn people on to is the State of the American Manager. It's a couple of years old, but relevant and a lot of good information. We've got about 2 minutes left. Austin or Mike, any closing thoughts here as we're wrapping up?
Austin, your activator is more powerful than mine. We've established
that. So there's a reason that I do that 95% of my coaching is to people who lead people. Because I think in our quest to try to change the world, doing it through managers is our best bet. And so I've chosen in my life to try to devote as much of my effort and energy to that audience as I can. It's really rewarding when you can help managers connect their soul, so who they are at their core, to their role as a manager. And that the connection point to me of strengths and engagement for a manager does just that. It matches the soul and the role. And on behalf of every person out there who's ever worked for an awful manager, when you can help a person work for a great manager, and you can help that manager help a manager go from decent to good or good to great, you can not only impact your client and the person paying you as a coach, but you're making a massive impact on the ripple effect of the lives of those people around them. So keep up the good work.
Fantastic. All right. Well, a big thank you both to Mike and Austin for a really great conversation today. I hope everybody took a lot of good information from there. I know I did. And I want to give a special thank you to all of you out there for participating in this session, for those of you who stayed up late to watch it, and those of you around the world who are in the morning or daytime that are watching this as well. Again, hope this session was valuable to you and you gained some new insights and strategies to help coach managers to success. So just a reminder, as I said, about the professional credit piece. Those of you who are live, this session is worth one core competency CCE hour from ICF. So watch for the event evaluation in your inbox on Friday. On the evaluation, you will be asked to indicate which sessions you attended. Professional credit verification will be sent to you via email as a result of completing the evaluation. And those of you who are watching the recorded version, we have not forgotten about you either, as you can earn one resource development hour for the session. So finally, as a look ahead for tomorrow's session, I hope you'll be able to come join Jeremy and I again for the next session that's happening tomorrow. Again, Jeremy and I are co-hosting this, and you'll get a chance to work with us both. But we'll be having Dean Jones, Jackie Merritt, and Kathy DeWeese here to talk about leading Clifton Strengths feedback sessions. So these Gallup experts will discuss the blending of coaching and consulting and provide you with the techniques to help you find the right balance in your coaching approach. It's going to be a really great session, so excited to join you all tomorrow. So again, thank you all for taking the time today, and have a good rest of your evening and daytime. Take care for now.